Afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much for registering and coming along to DatacomIT's webinar today in relation to digital preservation. I'd like to begin today by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land from which I'm speaking to you from today. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands from which each of our online attendees are living and working from, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I wish to also extend that same respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people with us here today. By way of introduction, my name's Richard Wilson. I'm the Business Development Manager for DatacomIT. Joining me today also is Christine Centofanti, who is DatacomIT's Marketing Manager. Christine's been responsible for setting up today's event and communicating all of that correspondence to you. We will also be recording today's session. And you will receive post the completion of today's session a link to that recording should you wish to view that again or to share that with any colleagues where you see fit. Also joining us today from DatacomIT is Roger Mills. Roger is the Digital Preservation Consultant for DatacomIT. He has a PhD in Digital Humanities and qualifications in Digital Curation and Preservation, Media Arts, as well as over 10 years experience working in the tertiary sector and libraries. Roger also heads up the implementation of our Recollect collection management system, which also incorporates a digital preservation component, and is currently working closely with Preservica to roll out that system for our clients here in Australia. Our special guest for today, however, is Robin Wright. Robin is the head of Australasia and Asia Pacific for the Digital Preservation Coalition, otherwise known as DPC. Robin is a copyright lawyer and legal researcher whose work explores the impact of digital technologies in the education and cultural sectors. She was previously manager, scholarly resources at Swinburne University of Technology, a research fellow at the Centre for Media and Communication Law at the University of Melbourne, and also worked as a solicitor. Robin has managed several digital research projects, including projects funded by the ARC, the Office for Learning and Teaching, and at Cinemedia, which is now the Australian Centre for Moving Image. She's a barrister and solicitor of the Supreme Court of Victoria and holds a BMUS, MA and Bachelor of Law honours. Now, before I hand over to both Roger and Robin for today's presentation, I just wanted to provide a bit of a quick overview for those that are not familiar with DatacomIT. But DatacomIT has over a 40-year history of operation. The first 20 years of that was providing digital preservation services, but in a historical sense, placing records onto microfilm and microfiche. But over the last 20 years, our operation has pivoted and has been working and establishing ourselves as, I guess, a leader in the digital preservation sense of providing digitisation for rare and unique materials. So those sorts of materials include microfilm, microfiche, all types of photographic material, whether they be negatives, transparencies, slides and the like, as well as all types of rare and fragile material and large format material. So providing scanning services and digitisation services for that type of material, we've certainly worked, I guess lucky enough to work with a lot of organisations in digitising a lot of very culturally significant projects over the last 20 years. In addition to providing that specialist digitisation services, we also are the Australian sales and implementation partner for a number of digitisation hardware products like book scanners and microfilm scanners and the like, as well as other solutions for the display and archiving of images, including Recollect. And some of you may have seen our recent news release about Preservica. And DatacomIT, if you haven't seen that, have just recently been announced as the Australian partner for Preservica here in Australia. And although today we won't be providing an overview of that Preservica solution, we will certainly be holding future webinars like today's one, which we'll send invites out to you as well, where we will actually be showcasing the Preservica solution. Now, just before I hand over to Roger and Robin, just a little bit of housekeeping. In the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, you'll notice there is a chat box there. So if during their presentation, if you do have any questions that come to mind as they're going through that presentation, please type them up into that chat box, once Roger and Robin have finished their presentation, we'll circle back to those and read those out and have those answered for you at the end of that presentation. So thank you very much for allowing me to provide you with that introduction, and I'll hand you over to Roger.
Thank you, Richard. I'll share my screen. You got that home slide there?
Yes.
Fantastic. Yeah, thanks again, Richard. And of course, I'm coming to you from Gadigal land of the Eora Nation in Sydney, and would also like to pay my respects to elders past and present as well. And thanks for everyone for joining us today. It's been a significant uptake for this webinar, beyond our expectations in many ways. And it's great to see such a healthy interest in digital preservation, which really is one of the reasons we wanted to do this, because unpacking what digital preservation is really important, we feel, because it can sometimes appear as a bit of an opaque field. It's one of a few webinars, as Richard said, that we have planned for 2023. The next one will focus on creating a digital preservation plan within your organization, which will step through the various stages required. And the following one will focus on preservation systems, which is where we will do a Preservica demonstration. So please look out for those mail outs and webinars. In this session, I'm going to provide a fairly high level overview of what it is to conceive, plan, and get started with digital preservation in your organization. Kind of with ideas for writing up a proposal and getting buy-in from your co-workers, managers, and executive. For some of you, this might be something you're just starting to consider, and others, it might be that you're a little bit further down the track, but I'm hoping that you'll all find something to take away from today's session. As Richard said, we've got expertise in digitization, digital preservation, and we'd welcome any inquiries that have after today about how we could be involved, potentially presenting on digital preservation in your organization, or any number of questions that you might have. Please feel free to contact us about those. So the structure of today, really going to look at the rationale for delivering a digital preservation strategy, organizational preparedness, importantly assessing the risk to your data as part of that preparedness, conceptual models and how to think about preservation systems and strategies, what it is to develop curation and appraisal criteria, likewise with migration, characterization, fixity. We're going to have a brief overview of the differences between preservation systems rather than systems themselves. And we're going to finish up with looking at discoverability, access, and sharing. So what is the key rationale for developing a digital preservation strategy? I'm sure you've all got things in mind here, but it's really about recognizing the value of your organization and community's heritage, and to secure and preserve it in perpetuity. And also, why are we doing this? We're doing it for the community as well, so to provide access to it. Library local studies collections, university and institutional archives are all storehouses of community knowledge and experiences that belong to the communities that help create those digital objects that they're comprised of. And I think it's incumbent upon us as professionals to ensure that they are maintained and accessible into the future. For different organizations, there might be more of an emphasis on, let's say, legal accountability and compliance. For example, companies being able to source financial documents, meeting minutes, reports and analysis that go and justify accounting or business decisions, sometimes several years down the track. The authenticity and integrity of data and digital objects is also crucial here, particularly for academic research. Having come from the tertiary sector myself, I know how important data integrity is to validating research analysis and findings. I also know, having been an early career researcher at one point, that research funding is increasingly being linked to black box approaches to ensuring that data is preserved beyond the life of a research project. And of course, all of these components then speak to the need, if you like, to mitigate the risks to data and archive collections, and to enable them to be discoverable and accessible for your stakeholders or designated community to reuse and access into the future. as the slide says there, and it's a common rephrase among the digital preservation community, preservation is not just what you plan and implement, but hopefully, as you'll see in this presentation, it's a series of actions that you continue to perform over the life cycle of your of digital objects. But to start us off, one of the things that is really vital here is to assess your organization's preparedness and actual capacity to implement digital preservation. For example, what resources will be made available to conduct preservation activities? What's your IT capability? What are the legal, policy, ethical considerations in terms of you complying with regulations and community expectations? Secondly, an awareness of your digital materials, like what types of digital objects and data you have, where are they stored? Do you need to migrate them from other systems, perhaps from older file types? Do you actually need to digitize some physical objects? Also, what type of metadata do you have? And how will you appraise and select what items you're going to ingest? And of course, as well as the immediate risk to their safety or longevity. And a really good place to start here is a register of digital assets. And we'll be talking to that very shortly. The other thing, though, finally, really is having a very clear understanding of what you're trying to achieve with your objectives. In developing digital preservation plans, organizations may work in stages. Firstly, identifying capacity to implement a digital preservation program, conceiving and writing up a plan, including, creating a register of digital objects and developing a framework for how you'll appraise and select those items for ingest, and then selecting a preservation system that can then be implemented. And all of that needs to be wrapped up into any sort of plan that you create. And of course, as consultants, DatacomIT work with organizations to help them, particularly in a range of these areas I've just been talking about. And as I was saying earlier, we'd be happy to assist in doing perhaps a more focused presentation to stakeholders in your organization. But also want to do a bit of a shout out here to Robin and the Digital Preservation Coalition for their rapid assessment model. And Robin might talk to this in her presentation, because not only have the DPC been helpful in shaping my understanding and approach to digital preservation, but also it's a fantastic resource for those of you who are just getting started for the first time. So to speak to the role of organizational infrastructure and resources, and here I've adapted Kenny and McGovern's three-legged stool framework for its simplicity, really. What you're looking at is really understanding what's required in a digital preservation program. So you've got your organizational infrastructure, what are the scope of and requirements you have, the technological infrastructure, how do you intend to address some of the requirements in terms of hardware, software, and skills to manage and use the system. And here it speaks to really the collaborative nature of a digital preservation program. You need technical data collection management skills that are just so important to a successful program. And of course, then you've got resources, what funding is required to maintain and update and integrate a digital preservation program on a sustainable level. So part of, I guess, developing any preservation program is an assessment of the risk to your data, which we can roughly break down into these following 6 categories. Media storage fragility, old storage systems. Believe it or not, I've worked with organizations that have content stored on, USB hard drives and pen drives, even compact discs. And this might be lighting a few fuses in the minds that are here today. But if the drives and discs themselves don't break or get scratched, the data on it can also become corrupted, otherwise known as bit rot. I mean, sometimes files might be created on older software or operating systems that are now obsolete or becoming obsolete. And then there's, of course, human error, whether accidental or intended, which can also put your data at risk. And then we can't discount the possibility of fire, flood, and theft, with fire and flood, particularly in regional locations. But even as we saw with the powerhouse in Sydney, there's examples where the natural environment can impact things as well. And And really, look, what drives us and many in this field is the inherent sense of urgency. Urgency because of the sheer volume of digital material that's stored on really fragile media with file extensions well past their use-by date, as well as being susceptible to being lost and damaged. What digital objects you as professionals deem worth preserving is really likely to be part of a wider Australian cultural heritage. And we really need to recognise this. And as a digitisation company, DatacomIT are only too aware of our role in preserving Australia's heritage too. So look, part of assessing risk to your data is developing a register of digital objects, as I was describing earlier. Examining what assets and data you have, any software that might be involved, where they are stored, what media, as well as identifying the immediate risk to their viability. And this can also aid in developing criteria for appraisal and selection, which we'll touch on shortly. This table is a mix of assets that might apply to a range of organizational contexts. But what is key here is really to understand what you have, where it is, what it's on, and the risks to it. And of course, metadata is really important here too, as well as we'll discover. So you've assessed your organizational preparedness, you've got your digital assets register, you're drawing up your plan. Let's look at conceptual models of preservation, planning, administration, and management of these assets and data. Probably the best known model is the OAIS, or Open Access Information System, which is one of a few models for preservation systems, or sometimes known as TDRs, or Trusted Digital Repositories, as well as being a framework for practitioners to understand and develop the series of actions and stages of preservation planning. So what we have here is the producer or archivist or customer creating content in the way of a SIP or a submission information package, which is essentially data that's ready to be ingested into the repository. It's the version of the data before it's processed for preservation, which then becomes what we know as an APE, or an archival information package. Now, the archival information package basically describes a folder that is intended for storage, containing the definitive copies of data for long-term preservation. It contains archival copies of files, including originals if chosen, and copies in preservation-ready formats, alongside any metadata and relevant documentation. And this is where the process, if you like, of digital preservation planning, management, and administration takes place. Once you develop your archival information packages from your SIP, it's really then about working on all of the data that you begin to ingest. But of course, we can't forget the consumer. That is your community. This is the reason we're doing this, to make accessible this data. And typically, from an OAI's perspective, what they're accessing and what you hope to provide to them is what we call a dissemination information package, or a DIP, which basically describes a package that's designed to be accessed by your designated community. And that might contain contents of an archival information package, but with file format derivatives more appropriate for access. Another useful model here is the Digital Curation Center lifecycle model. The focus is more on a preservation workflow, if you like. It illustrates a series of 6 stages, beginning with conceptualizing the process, creating, receiving, appraising, sessioning digital files. This might involve a selection of digital objects and data for ingest. Then thereafter, every ring illustrates a series of activities that are involved in the life cycle of your digital objects. And for those of you, I hope you can see this diagram, because it's a comprehensive workflow of digital preservation. It's very useful. Is of course the community watch and participation, and again, that's really about drawing attention to the requirement for us as practitioners to be aware of developments in digital preservation, to actively participate in shaping them ourselves. Of course, the DCC model also emphasizes that data curation should also be considered before the point of data creation or acquisition. In other words, when a project or business activity is designed or scoped. Now, a central part of the lifecycle model is curation and appraisal, as you've just seen, which is a big area, and we'll be returning to this topic in another session. But we can broadly say that digital curation is, as Abbott states here, the management and preservation of digital material to ensure accessibility over the longer term. In other words, it's about this ongoing set of activities that occur over the life cycle of data. And among the preservation community, as I was just saying, there's a pervasive understanding that curation and preservation strategies should preempt the creation of data, and that workflows really should be designed to enhance these activities. And this is particularly relevant to university research students who, having come from that sector myself, I would strongly argue should be provided with preservation knowledge and skills as part of their candidacy, particularly for PhD and master's students. And DatacomIT himself are currently working to develop a program for high degree research students that will do just this. Now, appraisal for the purposes of this demonstration is, as White and Wilson describe, about developing a set of criteria for assessing the value and data of resources, and how long data should be kept, and when it can be destroyed. Appraisal should be directly accountable to your decision making and be based on policies that are transparent and obviously adhere to legal requirements, complying to legislation and national data policies. And they're key to accountable decision making. Of course, archivists will already have acquisition or collection policies developed by their institution. But adding digital preservation to the mix requires additional thinking, not least because of the cost of data replication and storage. And again, I'm going to give a shout out here to the DPC for their appraisal decision tree, which is a really useful resource for considering what assets you might have. It's an interactive, I'm not going to go into it right now, but it's an interactive online model that will help you gain an understanding of some of the issues faced when appraising and selecting data. So returning to White and Wilson here from the Digital Curation Centre, I've adapted their appraisal criteria here as a useful starting point. And while it is focused a little bit more toward research data, it also holds true for many other archives and collections. So really, it's looking at the relevance of digital data for your remit, for the organization's remit, the scientific, social, cultural significance of that data, its originality. Is it the most complete source of information? Can it be, can more be derived from it? Then the reuse and reliability and integrity of the data files. Is it possible to replicate that data, or would it not be financially viable? Of course, then there's the economic case, the associated costs with managing and preserving resources, and of course the documentation, the necessary information to facilitate future discovery, access, and reuse. And of course, we've got to come back to that because that's the main reason we're doing this. So after having appraised and selected data for ingest, there's also this other area of migration, characterization, and fixity. Checking the integrity of your files from their checksum. Again, a very big topic, and we'll come back to this again in one of the other sessions. But migration simply means that the curator or preservation system is able to upgrade or transform digital assets from one generation to the next. Characterization, is the validation of a file format and properties from the technical metadata embedded in the file. And of course, a checksum is a unique string of digits as a digital fingerprint, let's say, of a digital file that can be validated by fixity checks. Look, there are a number of freeware technologies here and services such as Droid, JHOVE, and the PONOM technical registry, an MD5 checker, which is good for assisting in checksum validation. But it's worth pointing out here, I guess, that proprietary systems, or some proprietary systems, certainly such as Preservica, will do all of these for you as part of the workflow. Whereas other systems and other consultants can certainly help you in these areas, but they'll often be conducted in these external technologies to the system that you're ingesting data to. Often, but not always, but that's certainly the case. All right, so look, when it comes to thinking about preservation systems, what one you're going to, where you might move into, what one you might go for, they really fall into two categories. And we might describe these as proprietary and open source. It's really important to have a good understanding which is going to suit you in the planning stages of your digital preservation program. As we're going to be doing a webinar on preservation systems, we won't go too far into this. But essentially, proprietary systems are often cloud-based with a software as a service type agreement, can be in-house server technologies or a hybrid as well. While open source systems can also be web-based or in-house. But the main difference, I think, is that the open source systems often require a knowledge of source coding using Python or PHP, often using Linux operating systems. Whereas the proprietary systems will perform many of the preservation tasks that I've just been describing to you: migration, characterization, and checksums. So it's really, in the planning stage, the skills and resources that you have, will often and should dictate the type of system that you think you're best adopting. Lastly, look, I've mentioned this a few times, but understanding the needs of your designated community all the way through these processes is core to successful digital preservation. But it's essential for discoverability, access, and sharing. Making sure appropriate metadata is there, it's key, as is the schema or standard you use. Preservation systems will often, or mostly all, have a filter and facet search functionality that will enable stakeholders to discover and access content through the data that you ingest. But I know there's a lot of archivists and collection managers here that I'm sure you're all aware that discovery is only as good as the metadata that you've created. And look, the OAIS model that I was just describing before lays out a structure for access through the dissemination information package, ideally containing a derivative copy of the digital object with relevant metadata. Can be in METS files and software to retrieve and use the digital object as necessary. And look, again, we'll come back to this, but METS is basically a data encoding transmission standard expressed in XML that provides interoperability and the means to share digital objects between repositories and their users. So access formats are important to think about here, particularly that they contain an appropriate version of the original copy themselves, and that they can be used in the software that they might have been used to render the original from. And I've just included the brief checklist from the Digital Creation Centre because I think it's a useful shorthand summary of what is required for ensuring access and reuse within a preserved repository. So look, that's all I've got time for today, or all that I've got for you. But to summarise some of the key points we've covered, digital preservation is a series of actions performed over the life cycle of your objects, as I was saying earlier. Developing a digital preservation program requires organisation and technological infrastructure and resources, as well as a wide range of skills and collaboration. So it's really about drawing in other people that can perform some of these tasks within a preservation program. Of course, discoverability, access, and sharing requires a really good understanding of the needs of your designated community. And of course, many open source technologies, Droid, Pronom, JHove, and the others that I've mentioned exist to assist in a range of preservation tasks, which some proprietary systems offer as out-of-the-box functionality like Preservicate does. And look, lastly, we're here, DatacomIT is available to assist your organization to develop a digital preservation program or plan, help you digitize materials, as well as implementing a digital preservation system, namely the one we've just taken on, which is Preservica. And look, that's all I've got for you today. But so thanks for listening to me. And if you've got any questions, please add them via the chat window, and we'll attempt to answer them at the end of the session, along with any questions you might have for Robin, who has been waiting very patiently in the wings. And we feel very lucky to have her here with us to present the great work that the Digital Preservation Coalition has done and continues to do. So please give a very warm virtual welcome to Robin Wright. Who will now share her screen.
Excuse me, just a moment. I was trying to share my screen.
Just while you're getting your screen up, I know some of our attendees just looking at the chat had some issues in hearing sound or some of the vision. We have recorded this session, so we will send you that link, and of course you will be able to rewatch any of those parts that you missed there before. And, there we go. Got Robin's presentation.
I hope people can see my screen.
We can. Thank you very much, Robin.
Great. Thank you very much. And thank you very much to Richard and Roger and Christine for inviting me to speak at today's session. I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land I'm speaking from today, the Wurundjeri Woi Wurrung people of the Kulin Nation and their elders past, present and emerging. And I also acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands across Australia, their elders, ancestors, cultures and heritage. So thank you for coming along today. I'm very pleased to talk to everyone about the Digital Preservation Coalition. As Richard and Roger said, I'm the head Australasia and Asia Pacific, and I'm based in Melbourne. The Digital Preservation Coalition is a global community. It's a community working together to bring about a sustainable future for our digital assets. And I think what Roger said about the importance of what we're doing is so true, and that's what's recognised by the coalition, which came together first 20 years ago because they recognised that the digital technologies were going to create a huge heritage protection and preservation issue for the world. And they wanted to work together on that problem. So the DPC now has 151 members worldwide in 21 countries. So it's a very big and active community. We have 17 members in Australasia and Asia Pacific, and they range from Aotearoa, New Zealand to Singapore. So it goes across quite a large time zone in our part of the world. But as I said, I'm based in Melbourne here at Melbourne University, and Melbourne University are one of the full members of the DPC. And so we participate in global advocacy for digital preservation. The other thing I'd like to point out is that the DPC is a membership organisation and it's vendor neutral. So vendors of preservation systems can't be members of the DPC. The members are the ones who drive the program, but vendors can be supporters, and the supporters funds go into the Community Development Fund for grants that go to members to attend conferences. So here's a slide of a number of the members of the organisation around the globe. Actually, that slide has to be updated soon because we have some new members. It's growing at a great rate at the moment, which is exciting to see. But you can see the range of exciting organisations that are part of the DPC. Most of them are in the UK and Ireland, which is where the organisation started. But as I said, we're spreading out around the world. In Australia and the Asia Pacific, we have an active local community. We have a program of events in our local time zone here, and we're often holding watch parties of events that are held in the UK a day before. We'll show a recording here so that our members don't have to get up in the middle of the night. So we have 17 members. We have a number of national cultural organisations and peak industry bodies, a number of archives and universities. And we also support the community of practice Australasia Preserves that some of you may be aware of, which also runs digital preservation events. And so I help coordinate their events as well as part of our program. And as I said, we're interested in regional advocacy, explaining to government and other parties, not only cultural parties, a lot of the members of the DPC are commercial organisations as well, explaining to organisations like that about the importance of digital preservation. So here's a list of our Australasian members. You can see we have a number of cultural organisations, such as the Art Gallery of New South Wales and IATSIS, archives such as the National Archives of Australia and Queensland State Archives, and a number of universities, the University of Melbourne, the University of Sydney, Charles Sturt University, who do a lot of information management training, and RMIT. So it's quite a wide group of organisations, and we're very active, and hopefully we will have more members in the near future. The DPC's current strategic plan runs from 2022 to 2027, and we're building a welcoming and inclusive global community for working together to bring about a sustainable future for our digital assets. And it's divided into these 5 categories: community, advocacy, workforce development, a lot of which we're doing here in Australasia, good practice, and we're an accountable, sustainable and dynamic organisation. And we're a charitable foundation, so good governance is very important for the overall organisation. In 2022, the DPC had a number of large global events. You may have been involved with IPRES 2022, which was held in Glasgow. We have a yearly international conference, IPRES, and last year it was held in Glasgow to celebrate 20 years of the DPC. And we also run the Digital Preservation Awards. And this year we have a DP fellow from Australasia, Denise de Vries, who was a fantastic DP fellow and has helped us in a lot of events here in Australasia. And Digital Preservation Coalition also runs World Digital Preservation Day, which last year was on the 3rd of November. So any organisation is welcome to join the DPC. There's information about joining on our website if you want to go and have a look. Here's some of the benefits that members received. As I said, you're able to attend events and webinars on digital preservation issues that we run in our time zone. And there's training available, including the online training program from novice to know-how, which I'm sure some of you will have done. The Career Development Fund, as I said, provides grants for members to attend conferences, and we're broadening the range of conferences around the world that applies to. And you receive dedicated support from DPC specialists around areas such as implementing the DPC RAM, which we're going to be looking at in a moment. And members can contribute to the strategy and the overall work plan for the organisation, and participate in task forces and working groups around specialised areas of digital preservation. So it's a very active community and we welcome new members. So if you're interested in joining, please feel free to contact me. A couple of things, as I said, we're focusing at the moment on workforce development in Australasia. The Career Development Fund has been expanded to include more Australasian and Pacific opportunities for members to apply for grants. And also we've included self-identified grants. So if members have an area that they are interested in attending, they can request a grant to attend that conference. We're working on the DP competency framework to help people evaluate their competencies within their organisation with their staff, and as I said, novice to know-how online training. And we're offering some specific online training programs for members in Australasia this year, which will include digital preservation for non-practitioners, which will be available across a members' organisation. So if there are other people in your organisation that need to understand digital preservation and why it's important, we can put on this webinar for staff right across your organisation. It's an hour long. We're expanding Novice to Know-How, and so we're offering Novice to Know-How Plus sessions here in Australasia around specific areas such as risk management, policy and business cases, and we'll be running a winter school based on the Australasia Preserves training materials that were developed in 2019 in the middle of this year. So we've got quite an active program this year. So I wanted to look at some of our resources today, before we finish today. So the DPC sees digital preservation as the series of managed activities necessary to ensure continued access to digital materials for as long as necessary. And for some of our members, as long as necessary is effectively forever. We have archaeological resources, we have nuclear decommissioning resources. These resources have to be preserved forever for humanity. So this is a very important program. So what I'll do is just go through a couple of the resources that we have available on the DPC website. You can go and have a look at these, but these are just some that I thought might be immediately relevant. Most of them are openly available to both members and non-members. Some have some sections prohibited and restricted to members only, but most of them are available to anyone to use, because as a charitable foundation, the DPC's main aim is to disseminate as much of what the coalition develops to assist everyone in the world with digital preservation. So most people may know about the Digital Preservation Handbook. It's in its second version at the moment, and it provides an overview of an organisation's digital preservation activities, including acquisition, retention, storage, preservation planning, access, metadata and documentation. A lot of the areas that Roger was talking about earlier, it gives a really good outline of how you can implement those in your organisation, and includes technical solutions and tools and a really fantastic glossary, which is very useful. It's a very acronym heavy area, digital preservation. So the digital preservation is free and openly available to everyone on the DPC website. And as Roger mentioned, we have the DPC RAM, the Rapid Assessment Model. And this is a model that allows you to assess where you're up to with digital preservation within your organisation. It divides your organisation into categories where you can assess your level of capability. There are 12 categories, and you look at where you're up to with your organisation. It's been developed to suit all sizes of organisations, large and small, so it's not just something a large organisation would do, and it includes different types of content as well, and different types of solutions. It's solution neutral. It's something that you can look at within your organisation in a fairly short time frame to give you some idea of the current status of digital preservation within your organisation and which areas you'd like to improve. So it's based on good practice standards, and as I said, it's freely available to everybody and simple and easy to use. So we help members with the RAM modelling if they need it within their organisation, and we encourage members to do the RAM once a year and make the results available to the DPC if they feel they like to. Not everyone wants to, but if you do that, then we can benchmark different types of organisations against your organisation and give you some information about where you stand in the digital preservation ecosystem. So you may also be interested in the Digital Preservation Policy Toolkit. If you're looking at the idea of implementing or developing a digital preservation policy at your organisation, this is currently only available for members, so members can log in to access. This was developed with the University of Bristol as a book sprint done with the DPC in 2019, and it includes information on what you want in a good digital preservation policy, a step-by-step guide to putting a policy together, and a template for building a policy. So if you're starting from the beginning, this is definitely something worth looking at. And it gives a case study of the University of Bristol. The policy toolkit is going to be updated and relaunched in Australasia in March this year, next month, when our Executive Director, William Kilbride, is coming out to visit, and he will relaunch the policy toolkit. And that'll be an updated version, and I hope it will be open to more people. And then the DPC Competency Audit Toolkit, or CAT. You can see we're big on acronyms here. That ties in with the competency framework that's been developed by the DPC. It provides a guide and workbooks for you to assess the skill levels in digital preservation within your organisation. And it gives example role descriptions if you're looking at job descriptions for advertising positions, or you're looking at where there are gaps in the skills that you need within your organisation for digital preservation. The Competency Audit Toolkit will help you with that. And it's been designed for use with the DPC RAM, so it links to the RAM categories. So again, it's a very useful resource that is available to everybody. Now, I also just wanted to say that the DPC this year has started a number of new working groups and task forces. These are available for members to participate in, and these are dealing with very specific areas that members have concerns or problems or issues they'd like to discuss with other members. So these work around the world, and some of them, for example, the second one, the Fair Play Task Force, which is looking at emulation technologies and preserving software in video games and the issues that come up with that more complex digital data. We're running the sessions for the task force in both the Australasian time zone as well as the UK and American time zones. So as much as possible, we try and arrange meetings in time zones to benefit all members. But we have an audiovisual working group, and of course, a lot of people have audiovisual content in their digital collections. As I said, the Fair Play Emulation Task Force will be looking at the problems involved with copyright and emulation and preserving digital video material across various time zones and jurisdictions, legal jurisdictions. There's a Museums and Galleries working group, and we have a few museums and galleries here in our local members who will be on that, and an Operational Preservation Systems working group. So that's for people who already have preservation systems that are working, and they would like to discuss with other members how it works and issues that they are having around preservation. And we have a National Libraries and Archives working group for national organisations and web archiving and preservation. So these are all areas that our members have said they're interested in exploring in more depth. And there's information about them on our website. So, as I said earlier, the local program here in Australasia and Asia Pacific, it provides DPC benefits and support for our local members in our time zone. It facilitates the local subcommittee. So all the members here in Australasia have a representation on the Australasian subcommittee, and that is a subcommittee of the global organisation. So we report back to the board and the council on the activities of the Australasian subcommittee. We deliver a program of events in our local time zone, training, and also, as I said, watch parties and other events that we put on. And in March, we will be putting on an event which I think will be open, to everyone, a digital preservation clinic on a database preservation, preserving legacy databases with open source software. So that will be a really fascinating program. And in December, we did one on cybersecurity and digital preservation. So if you want to be on the mailing list, drop your name to me and I can make sure you know about our program as we release it. As I said, we assist members with workforce development. We're doing offering quite a lot of training this year, and we're interested in communication and advocacy for digital preservation. So we put in a submission to the new National Cultural Policy that the government is rolling out at the moment, and talked about the importance of digital preservation in that context. And we promote our resources and we support regional membership growth. We would love to have more members here in the region. The bigger we are, the bigger program we can put on and the more that we can do for the members and other people who are interested in digital preservation. So as I said, William Kilbride, who's the Executive Director of the DPC, is coming out to Australasia from the 20th and 29th of March, and will be running events for members and some non-members in Melbourne, Canberra, Sydney and Wellington in New Zealand. And we have some New Zealand members as well, so it'll be great to get to see them. So I hope that's given you enough information about the DPC. As I said, you can always contact us and I'm happy to provide more information. But hopefully some questions have gone into the chat box. So I will stop sharing now and Richard can take us through any questions. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much for that, Robin. That was an excellent overview of the DPC and very informative. I'm sure everyone was very pleased to have that information. So thank you for coming along and presenting today. So looking at the questions, so there are some people that are still typing, but apologies once again. It looks like there was a number of people that did have some issues initially in connecting and some issues there with the audio. But as I had mentioned before, we are recording this session and we'll send a copy out to everyone. So if you did miss anything, you will get to review that again if needed. There are a couple of questions there after that from Mitcha from RBA, just asking if we're able to share the slides from today's presentation. So certainly we'll have the recording of this video, but I think we should be able to share those slides with you as well. And just scrolling through these questions. Okay, so a question here from Rosemary Retorto, asking as to whether public libraries are able to join the DCP. I guess that is a question for yourself, Robin.
Yes, everyone can. A public library could join the DPC. It's not an insubstantial cost, so it may be beyond the budget of some public libraries. And we've been speaking to Public Libraries Victoria about the possibility of consortium membership. We have some consortium members already. As I said, NASLA is a member, and also the Australian Society of Archivists and RIMPA are members. So people who are members of those organisations can access some of the DPC benefits even without becoming members. But we're open to anyone who wishes to become a member, and there's information about how to join on the website. This is organisational members, not individual members. So yes, so please have a look on the website.
There is a sort of similar sort of follow-up question, well not follow-up, but additional question there from Nicole Brett, asking as to whether there's a student membership, but then a follow-up question. Obviously, Nicole must be a student there at CSU, or I presume that's Charles Sturt University, and asking whether if the university is there as a member, can students access these resources as part of that membership?
Yes, thank you. No, unfortunately, there isn't any student membership level within the organisation. There are two levels of membership: associate membership and full membership. And as I said, they're focused on organisational memberships, and so not in substantial cost to join. However, yes, as a student at CSU, because CSU is a member, you are able to access many of our resources, most of them. And I know the lecturers asked us about getting recordings of all the IPRES presentations from IPRES in Glasgow last September, and have been providing them and showing them to some of the CSU students in their courses. So yes, as a CSU student, you should be able to access most of our material. And if there's anything you can't, speak to your lecturers and they can contact me and I can get hold of it for you. So obviously our aim is to make it as available as possible to information management students.
Great. Another question here from Rosalind Malone. Hi, Robin, do you find it's a challenge to find the skill sets required for complex digital object preservation with the Fair Play Working Group?
Yes, simple answer. Yes, most of our members here seem to have the same problem with locating people with the required skill sets in this area. It's a developing area, it's very new, and the crossover of the sort of curatorial heritage training and IT training, I think still has to happen properly. And that's something that we're keen to work with the training organisations like CSU, which is why we're really pleased that they came on as a member. But yes, it is difficult to find staff with the correct skill sets. And that's why we're doing as much training as we can and offering things like the CAT that help people define exactly how they can use professional development within their organisation to develop the skills of their existing staff to move into digital preservation. And I know the National Archive has been doing that in particular because, of course, they have a lot of archivists, curatorial people who have done this work over many years and are interested in moving into the digital area. So we're trying to offer training where possible in places that plugs those gaps. But I think this is going to be an ongoing problem for the sector in the industry here, and not only here, it's around the world, but it's quite obvious here that that's a problem. So that's why we're focusing on workforce development here in Australasia.
I don't know if I could just come in here as well. What this speaks to, I think, is what a lot of proprietary systems have recognised, in that they are taking a lot of particularly the technological side of preservation and making it very easy, taking it out of the hands, if you like, of the preservers, and it becoming more of a thing where once you ingest the content, it's many of the things that we've discussed today are already done to your files. I just thought I'd add that point to it.
Very good. Okay, another question there from Nola Starmans, just inquiring as to what the cost of membership actually is.
Yes, for an associate member, it's in Australian dollars, it's around $6,000 a year. And for full members, it's around $17,000 a year. So it's focused on institutional membership.
Thank you. And the question is the DPC, this is, sorry, from Leslie Page, is the DPC open to school archivists?
Yes, as I said, we're not open to individual members, but there are a number of schools who are members in the UK. As I said, it might be as a school, as a teacher, it might be worth joining one of the organisations that you can join as an individual member, because we don't have individual members of the DPC, we only have organisational members. But if you can join a consortium like the Australian Society of Archivists, for example, then those members can get access to our benefits.
Right.
Gotcha.
That's probably the best avenue for individuals to actually get access. Another question from Rosemary Retorto, just the question, I'm not sure it reflects back on her previous one, but presumably Trove is being monitored by some of the policies mentioned? I'm
not sure what you mean by monitored.
I think maybe Rosemary's referring to as to whether Trove has an element of digital preservation within its solution.
The NLA are big on digital preservation. The NLA, in fact, DPC is going to put on a watch party this year with Barbara Searmans, who is a practitioner who's been active in the digital preservation area for 30 years. She's going to talk about 30 years of digital preservation, and she's picked 4 classic articles that were published at key points, and the first one was published by Colin Webb from the NLA in Australia. So the NLA have been very active for a long time around digital preservation, and that's obviously an important part of Trove. The NLA are members of the DPC through NASLA, the National and State Libraries Association. So we do have a lot of contact with the NLA. They're very active in the area.
Thank you. Another question here from Alana Melville, and she says, thank you, Robin, that was really interesting, and thank you. But she was wondering for the training who the target audience is, and is it intended for managers to do the training and then return to the organisation just to disseminate that information to staff, or for the whole team's organisation to attend that training together?
Thanks. It depends on the training, obviously. The knowledge to know-how, we would make that available to everyone in the whole team, the whole digital preservation team. And in fact, I've just had a university who's not a member. So if there is space in the knowledge to know-how program, we'll make that available to non-members if we can, but there's a limited number of spaces because of the learning management system. But I just have a university who is not yet a member of the organisation, and they have 8 people doing the knowledge to know-how. But as I said, that program we're putting in this year of the 1-hour online training, that's aimed at right across the organisation. So that will be focused more on managers and IT staff, people who aren't necessarily working in digital preservation, but want to know about how it functions. So the answer is it depends which training session you're interested in, but knowledge to know-how should the aim is it for be done by everyone in the team.
Thank you. Another question from Rosemary Retorto. Just in that the general public seem to think that scanning their family photographs means that they can throw out the original hard copies. Do you think this is reasonable to do? And meaning, are we confident enough in digital preservation to be able to access those images today and on an iPhone in 50 years, for example?
I'd be interested to hear what Roger thinks about that.
Well, firstly, digitization is not preservation. It's an essential. It can be an essential step in. It's an essential first step in digital preservation. It's not digital preservation, so that'll be the first thing. Whether we'll be able to, and scanning a photograph on a mobile phone and then throwing the photograph out. No, just don't go there. Tell them not to go there. It's much better for them to send you the original photograph if you're willing to take it. But look, to speak to the question about whether we'll be able to access iPhone or current Samsung photos in 50 years' time, one of the objectives of digital preservation, I'm sure Robin will agree, is to defeat obsolescence. And to be able to migrate file formats into the future. So I would like to think that we will still be able to find those grainy photographs of a better copy of photograph in the future to come. But keep the original, I'd say, and send that.
I say so too. And I also wanted to say that we are very keen to be advocating to government exactly what Roger just said, that digitisation is not preservation. Because the problem with a lot of funding that's provided is that it's provided on a grant basis to digitise, but then there's no ongoing training for the ongoing needs of holding properly digitally preserved material. So it depends what people do. And it's really important that we all look at it as a long-term project so that we can access this material in the future.
Exactly.
Very good. Well, look, I think that's there are a couple of other similar questions there just about how people can access the DPC. And I think we have just gone over time, but just to clarify again from Rosalind's asked the question. So can school archivists access the DPC resources through the ASA?
Yes.
Yeah. Very good.
And if you look at if you look at our website, which is just dpconline.org, a lot of that material is openly available whether you're a member or not. So just go and have a look.
Fantastic. Well, we have just sort of gone over the allotted time by a couple of minutes there. So look, we will wrap it up there now. So thank you once again to everyone that came along and attended today's session. And special thanks, of course, to Robin, who has come along and provided today's presentation there on the DPC. That was fantastic. I think very truly well appreciated by all of our attendees. So thank you very much, Robin.
Thank you.
And again, thank you everyone for coming along. As I say, we will send out an email to you thanking you for attending and with a copy of today's presentation, and we will keep you informed of our future sessions. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.